Thank you for stopping by at the Movie Marquee. Our podcast reviews well-known movies and contains spoilers. The podcast may contain mature subject matter and mature language. Listener discretion is advised. Enjoy the show.
Quiet on set. Places, everybody. And action.
Welcome, everybody, to the Movie Marquee. Today's showing will be the 1982 release Poltergeist. With me, as always, is Ken.
They're here.
And Ted.
You son of a bitch. You moved the cemetery, but you left the bodies, didn't you? You son of a bitch. You left the bodies, and you only moved the headstones. You only moved the headstones.
And I'm Eric. This house is clean. That's
Well,
a great little accent there, everybody.
We got that going for us.
Let's talk about some of the particulars about this movie. Ted, what do you got for us?
The movie Poltergeist was released June 4th, 1982. It's directed by Tobe Hooper. It has a running time of 114 minutes. It had a budget of $10.7 million and a box office gross of $121.7 million.
A clear blockbuster.
Yes, it was a good summer blockbuster. Starring JoBeth Williams as Diane Freeling, Craig T. Nelson as Stephen Freeling, Monique Dunn as Dana Freeling, Oliver Robbins, Bobby Freeling, Heather O'Rourke as Carol Ann Freeling, Zelda Rubinstein as Tangina Behrens, Beatrice Straight as Dr. Martha Lesh, Richard Lawson as Dr. Ryan Mitchell, James Karen as Mr. Teague, Michael McManus as Ben Tuthill, and Virginia Kaiser as Mrs. Tuthill.
Who played the dog?
I don't know. The dog.
And Scraps, the golden retriever.
Scraps?
I don't know. Dog has some pretty monumental scenes in that movie, of course, right?
Happy Scrappy Hero Pup.
There we go. A nice Clerks reference here for all our past listeners. You gotta love it. She loves it, man. She loves it. What did the critics think of this one, Ted?
On Rotten Tomatoes, this is a certified fresh at an 86% critic score. It has an audience score of 79%. It's actually difficult to find negative reviews of the movie. For at the time, it seemed like pretty much a lot of the critics really liked it. I was able to find 2 negative reviews. The first was the staff of Variety, and their ultimate point of their review was, given the talents, Poltergeist is an annoying film because it could have been so much better. Certainly the subject is interesting, a persistent parapsychological phenomenon that defies scientific explanation, yet refuses to go away. So they didn't care for it. And then there was Gary Arnold of the Washington Post. He said it's a fitfully witty and reliably spine-tingling horror melodrama. While it works you over effectively, Poltergeist betrays a good deal of rather dubious, uncoordinated manipulations. On the positive critic side, we have Vincent Canby from the New York Times. He wrote that Poltergeist is like a thoroughly enjoyable nightmare, one that you know that you can always wake up from, and one in which, at the end, no one has permanently been damaged, that Alfred Hitchcock might have appreciated. And then there's Richard Corliss in Time magazine, and he said, at first and final glance, Poltergeist is simply a riveting demonstration of the movie's power to scare the sophistication out of any viewer. It creates honest thrills within the confines of a PG rating and reaches for standard shock effects and a forced suspension of disbelief only at the climax, when we realize that the characters are behaving with such obtuseness precisely because they are trapped inside a horror movie. And of course, I'll finish up with our friend Roger Ebert. He gave it 3 out of 4 stars.
Who's this Hooper guy you reference?
Tobe Hooper, he was the director, or at least that's what they said.
I was gonna say I was being a smartass. Sure, he was.
They say he was the director.
Whatever, man. It's Spielberg.
We'll discuss this.
Yep.
Big controversy.
Big controversy. That pesky E.T. movie got in the way.
I did see that Gene Siskel did not like this movie either.
No, he did not. What did he give it? 1 star?
I know it wasn't a good one. That's all I remember.
It wasn't.
I can't believe I missed that one.
I actually found that out by a review of Poltergeist 2. That was the reason why I found out the Wrath of the Poltergeist.
The Wrath of God.
The Wrath of Poltergeist.
Let's talk about the plot, Ken. I'm sure you've got a winner for us there.
Stephen and Diane Freeling live in Cuesta Verde. Stephen is a successful real estate developer, and Diane looks after their 3 children, 16-year-old Dana, 8-year-old Robbie, and 5-year-old Carol Ann, when she is not smoking pot, that is. Late one night, Carol Ann starts talking with the family's TV set while it displays static. The next night, she again fixates on the TV, and a ghostly white hand emerges from the screen. Bizarre events occur the following day. A glass of milk spontaneously breaks, silverware bends, and furniture moves on its own. These strange occurrences initially seem harmless, but soon grow more sinister. During a severe thunderstorm, the backyard tree comes alive and grabs and tries to eat Robbie as a late-night snack. While the family rushes outside to rescue him, Carol Ann is sucked into a portal inside the closet. As the family frantically searches for her, Carol Ann's voice calls out from the TV. Ghostbuster Dr. Martha Leash arrives with her 2 team members to investigate. They determine there is a poltergeist intrusion involving multiple ghosts. Meanwhile, Stephen learns from his boss that Cuesta Verde's development was built on a former cemetery and the graves were moved to a nearby location. Dr. Leash calls in Tangina, a spiritual medium. Tangina determines the spirits are lingering in a different sphere of consciousness and are not at rest. They are attracted to Carol Ann's life force. Tangina also detects a dark presence she calls the Beast, who is restraining Carol Ann and manipulating her life force to prevent the other spirits from crossing over. The entrance to the other dimension is in the children's bedroom closet and exits through the living room ceiling. Diane retrieves Carol Ann and they drop through the ceiling to the living room floor, covered in ectoplasm. As they recover from the ordeal, Tangina proclaims, "This house is clean." Shortly after, the Freeling family have nearly finished packing to move out of the house before the family is to leave for the Holiday Inn. Stephen goes to the office, leaving Diane at home with Robbie and Carol Ann. The Beast ambushes Diane and the children. The unforeseen force drives Diane to the backyard in the pouring rain, dragging her into the flooded, unfinished swimming pool. Skeletal corpses and coffins float up around her as she tries to crawl out in order to save her children. She does rescue the children, and they escape to the outside as more coffins and decomposed bodies erupt from the ground. Stephen arrives home to the mayhem. As more coffins appear, Stephen realizes his boss never relocated the cemetery and merely moved the gravestones, leaving the bodies. The Freelings jump into their car and collect Dana, just as she returns home. "What's happening?" They flee Cuesta Verde as the house implodes into the portal while stunned neighbors look on. The family checks into their motel room, where Stephen puts the TV outside the room. The end.
Oh my God, this movie is like an acid trip the way you read it. It's true. I mean, it's the plot, but it's so out there. If you've never seen this movie, you'd listen to this going, "What the hell is that?"
Yeah.
And maybe if
Well-
Carol Ann wasn't smoking all that pot, maybe things wouldn't have
Yeah.
gone so south, right?
Maybe it's because the parents smoked all that pot. Maybe this is all just in their imagination.
Well,
Yeah, I liked your narration there. We should have done like the Teague, "Damn you, dirty ape" scene there. You know,
Yeah.
What's happening?
what's happening?
I love it when he just goes, "Dad, drive away. Let's leave our sister here and let's just drive away." Just love it. That boy was so annoying. I mean, he was like the whiniest little boy on the face of the earth.
And he had those big ass jack-o'-lantern teeth. God, it's like a
Yeah.
beaver.
Hopefully, hopefully he had some orthodontics done.
Yeah.
Mom,
'Cause-
Karen.
Yeah, like that scene when Carol Ann's in the TV and they hear her for the first sign, and he's like,
Yeah.
"Mom, Mom, Mom," and they show both their faces. His teeth are like 5 feet sticking out of his mouth.
yeah, that's the point where you can see it the worst.
Throw a
So,
log
well,
at him or
yeah.
something. I don't know, man. All right, well, this bad boy is from 1982, so I'm assuming none of us saw it first run, unless you had some really crappy parents.
It was PG.
Yeah, it was a hard PG movie. Ted, when's the first time you saw this one?
This is one I don't remember when I saw it for the first time. It was probably high school or college. I don't even remember. All I know is it never had the impact on me that it had on others. And we'll get into the reasons why. This is one of those movies, though, that when you would go to your local video store, this was always in one of those bigger boxes. You know what I'm talking about? It was an oversized box. It always looked cool. And it was like, this is something that you need to see. And for whatever reason, I never rented it. My dad was into horror movies, and of course I've been into horror movies. I don't know why it took me so long to see this one. I can see why it would scare some people, especially if they saw it when they were younger. But if you're over a certain age, I don't see where it would.
I'll give a shout out to one of our movie reviewers here who did a line that just cracked me up. The line was, Ken had every movie channel known to man growing up.
That was Justin.
Justin, when he's talking about the first time we saw him, he's like, and Ken had every movie channel growing up. I love that. So we'll play into that. I'm assuming, Ken, did you see it at home on the thousands of cable channels you had?
Yeah, most definitely.
Most definitely.
Yeah. And I would say this is the first one that I would remember seeing on paid cable channels that was unedited. So I saw the whole thing, and it's probably the first movie that scared me that was unedited. I had seen Salem's Lot, and I had seen...
Dude, I'm sorry.
Oh, I love Salem's Lot. Too.
Oh, David Soul at his finest.
And I saw The Exorcist, but they were both edited for TV versions from what I could remember.
Wasn't Salem's Lot on, wasn't like that on NBC? Wasn't it made for TV?
Yeah, it was.
I'm sure just David Soul's acting scared you.
Isn't he from Starsky and Hutch?
Starsky and Hutch. Sings a mean ballad, too.
They should have had Starsky and Hutch in Salem's Lot. That would have been an interesting movie. But I actually enjoy that movie. Now, Return to Salem's Lot. But I really enjoyed this. And this was something that, like me, my mom would watch all the time because my mom used to like these type of movies, too.
I remember seeing this movie. It's 82. I was born in 74. So I saw this movie on video. I remember someone rented it. It wasn't my parents, but someone rented it, and we threw it in the old VHS player and watched it. It's probably at a sleepover or something. I don't remember. But, dude, this movie scared the crap out of me when I saw it. I remember he sees that stupid clown, the tree breaking through the window. I mean, this movie scared the life out of me when I saw it. Probably came out in video, 83, 84. They're usually like a year or two out at that time. So I was probably like 10, 11, big baby at that age. But
I was about 12 when I probably first saw it.
Freaked me out, man.
It did my wife, too. Like, she wouldn't even watch it with me for the podcast.
No? Wouldn't watch it at all?
Wouldn't watch it, no. The scare that she got as a kid is still, I guess, fresh. That she didn't want to even attempt to try to relive it, even though I tried
She
to
loves
tell her.
horror movies, right?
Yeah, she does, which is weird.
It is very weird. My wife's movie like that is not a movie. It's a music video. It's Thriller. My wife does not like Thriller. It scared her.
She's just afraid of Michael Jackson.
She's not a 10-year-old boy at the time, so she would have been probably okay.
Well, it looks like the same makeup people were in it. Makeup and Thriller was better.
Makeup for Thriller were the same people that did American Werewolf in London.
It's John Landis.
Because John Landis did the music video.
Hell, we could review that Thriller video as a movie on its own, to be honest with you.
With this type of movie, I think it actually brought us other type of movies like it later on. I mean, you don't have Paranormal Activity and movies like that without Poltergeist leading the way.
Maybe.
I think this movie is a special movie. It's one of those.
You could give a little cred to Amityville.
You can, but I think this is much better than Amityville. I think it wasn't Roger Ebert that said this is the movie that Amityville wanted it to be. I think this movie actually does it a whole lot better than that movie did. I think it's a good combination of acting and storytelling and special effects. One doesn't overrun the other. Usually with horror movies, they get too bogged down into the special effects, and it's all about special effects. And this movie doesn't do that. There's actually a real story here, a real family here. This would be one of the movies that you can credit for the movies that we have today.
As far as haunted house movies or horror movies in general?
I would say Paranormal Activity movies like Ghost, Poltergeist,
so haunted house.
With the special.
I can see where you would say that. It's been done better. I even think some of the movies that were older than Poltergeist, you look at some of the Vincent Price haunted house movies, like The Fall of the House of Usher, is a little bit better than Poltergeist. I can't say that it doesn't break new ground, because it does. It uses special effects, but here's the thing. It tries to do too much, in my opinion. Even the name is not entirely correct. It's multiple ghosts that are tormenting the family. It seems to try to do too much. And this is part of the problem with the movie as well, is Steven Spielberg started off awesome with Jaws, and then he did Close Encounters of a Third Kind. Both are amazing movies. But then when he gets into the early to mid 80s, all of a sudden he tries to do Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which, cool story, but gets really bogged down with the crazy special effects. It just seems that something's lost here, and we know for a fact that Tobe Hooper, who directed Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which was a revolutionary horror movie, he gets lost here as well. He gets completely overrun by Steven Spielberg in this sense, and that's fine because Steven Spielberg's a brilliant movie maker.
If Spielberg wasn't tied to E.T., you wouldn't even have Tobe Hooper on this film at all.
Well, right.
He's a fill-in, let's be honest. You can debate that all day long. You know, who really directed this movie? Tobe Hooper's name is on it because of contractual reasons with Spielberg doing E.T., but we all know that Spielberg spent many, many, many hours on this set.
You look at the Goonies, it smells and tastes like Spielberg, it's got to be Spielberg.
Right.
I do think that this is still directed by Hooper, but I do think it's heavily influenced by Spielberg. I'm sure Spielberg said, you need to go into this direction, you need to film it this way, and that's how he did it.
This is one of the major controversies of the movie, is because there was actually an investigation done by the Directors Guild to see co-directing credits. And that would have affected, like what Eric continues to say about E.T., definitely affected all of the proceeds and what he would have gotten out of E.T. Somehow they convinced this quote-unquote independent board that Steven Spielberg didn't deserve a directing credit. Tobe Hooper's not without sin, because at this point he was addicted. And that's
what was he addicted to?
I believe it was cocaine.
Oh,
and
well, it was 82, so...
And I mean, he was coming off Texas Chainsaw Massacre, so he was still writing that.
That was 74, though. That's 8 years earlier.
Yeah, he was still the independent horror golden child at that point.
But not in 82. He was probably just picked because Spielberg knew he was a name, and he's like, well, I can puppet master him here.
If you ask Spielberg at the time, he was picked because he was impressed what he did with Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
And what did he do after Texas Chainsaw Man? He did one other movie.
Not a whole lot. It was some lower budget movies that didn't succeed as well as Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Which is weird because Texas Chainsaw Massacre, if you were looking for comparisons on directors, if you would have said, hey, this director did that movie and vice versa, you'd be like, what? Come on.
This does not look like a Tobe Hooper movie.
No, not at all.
Well, the weird thing about it is after Texas Chainsaw Massacre, he only did 2 movies in between. Funhouse and Eaten Alive. One in 76 and then Funhouse in 81. And then after this, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 in 86, which is a horrible... That's a horrible movie.
I hate to jump on a guy, but he did have problems. And even the lady who plays the medium, she said Tobe Hooper didn't like her because she knew that he was having a problem.
Well, that's because she's psychic.
Right. That's well documented. It doesn't change the fact that he was a visionary with the first movie that he made, but he had a hard time following that up. That's a discussion for another day. When Tobe Hooper finally got himself right, he did make some other good movies after Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, which probably a normal guy, had he not made Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a movie like TCM 2 would have torpedoed his career, because that is one of the most horrible movies ever made.
I would say Hooper is more like a technical advisor in this movie.
Right.
Because Spielberg is not a horror guy, so he probably needs somebody there to kind of consult.
This really isn't a horror. This is not a horror movie. Let's be honest.
Oh, I think it is. I definitely think it is. You just said it scared the crap out of you as a kid.
Yeah, a horror movie doesn't have to scare the crap out of you as a kid.
A series on AMC called The History of Horror. Poltergeist is included in their episode on haunted houses. I believe
it should be. It's a haunted house.
It's the first movie they talk about on that episode. So it does have a place in a horror genre. You figure out that there's something crazy going on in the first 10 minutes of the movie where she's talking to the TV. And see, and I hate to do this. I love both Lucas and Spielberg, but this is a horror movie that would have been made for a kid, not made to scare adults. This is not made to scare adults.
For an adult, it is a suspense horror movie. It's more suspenseful. For a child, you're absolutely right. It did its job.
I think it depends on what your idea of horror is as an adult, though, too. Are you more scared of the supernatural, or are you more scared of a psycho killer? All you care about are slasher people, people who are going to eat your
Is it
face
Freddy
off as
Krueger coming
horror.
after you,
Yeah, I
or
mean, if those are the type of horror movies that scare you, that's maybe how you look at things. Whereas the supernatural scares me more. Things that I can't explain. You would never catch me in a graveyard after dark. It's
I
going to
can't
happen.
explain some of those Freddy Krueger movies
Yeah,
or the
we'll get into that one
Halloween.
day.
And I've said this before, whenever we've tackled comedy or horror is subjective as well as
So is
comedy.
comedy. You're right.
When we reviewed the Blair Witch Project, supernatural stuff does scare me. One of the creepiest things ever that I experienced was paranormal activity. I have people look at me like I have three eyes when I tell people that paranormal activity freaked me out.
It
But
did. It did freak. It freaked me out too because it's so realistic. You could justify it as that could really happen.
Right, because they turned that time stamp. They turned something so simple and made that scary. Poltergeist doesn't fall into the paranormal activity type of a thing because everything that's scary is kind of played off jokey.
I don't know. I agree
Clown,
with
the
you.
tree.
I don't feel that the
the
clown
bodies.
is jokey. I don't feel like any of that stuff is jokey at all. That clown scared the crap out of me as a kid, and even as an adult, it still kind of makes me feel a little bit weird.
The clown is creepy. And if you are predisposed to having the fear of clown, which my wife does, which is why she still won't watch the movies because of the clown.
Ah, well, that makes sense.
And she has a predetermined fear of clowns. That's a natural thing, so that's playing on that.
So she's not watching Killer Clowns from Outer Space?
Ask Ted about the time that he took his wife to a Statesville
Wow,
type of
that's-
place with clowns.
It was an
Way to go,
interesting
Ted.
experience.
I think the build up to these scare scenes are great. The boy who's scared of the tree. I can understand why this boy is scared of this tree. It's kind of a scary looking tree. Why he doesn't close
Dead tree too.
Why,
It's like,
why doesn't he close the blinds is beyond me.
yeah, why
Put the
doesn't
curtains
he?
up or
Right.
something. Just don't look at it. But he's fixated on this. I love the sounds where Carol Ann is running away from the beast and you're hearing it running through the house. I think all these buildups are awesome. I think they do a great job. Maybe the reveal isn't as scary as you want it to be because the buildup is so good. But I think he does an extremely good job. I love the use of the skeletons, the live skeletons.
The one thing I really love about this movie, to build on that, is I remember when I saw this, I'm thinking to myself, okay, they save Carol Ann, they're in the tub, it's over. But no, wait, there's a second act to this movie, which I think is kind of a nice little addition.
I think the second act, though, fails a little bit. That's where I probably will agree with Ted a little bit here. I think the second act gets a little pokey a little bit. Why would you stay in the house? I don't care if it's clean. If you're moving out, go to that hotel that night and just hire movers or something like that. It doesn't make any sense to go to work, leave your wife at home with the two kids. The kids
And the kids move back in the room, right?
back in the room. That doesn't make sense. And then everything turns into a special effects fest. I like the idea of it, the second ending. I do kind of like it, but I think it needed to be done differently. Why don't I just put the kids in the room? They can go to sleep in the room. I'll go take a bath and then I'll go take a nap. Some poltergeist is going to come and try to have sex with me, because that's what that looks like to me, is that poltergeist is trying to have sex with the mom there. She's like flipping up and down. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but I don't know what else is happening, but something weird there.
I think it's weird that you go through time and space, you save your daughter from wherever, but now you're going to stay in the house. When the house was the gateway into this pendulum, I'd be so far from that place, I'd probably torch the place. It's like Amityville. They leave everything in the house and they never return.
It's not like they did anything to make sure that the poltergeist was gone. They saved the girl. It wasn't like they trapped it in some box like Ghostbusters or something like that. They just probably retreated and waited to come back at another time.
If you're going that route, even if they leave that night, they're just leaving this for the next people to inhabit the house.
The answer
They're
is
gonna
heck
leave.
yeah.
They're gonna.
Hell
they're
yeah.
Gonna leave this problem for the next
Suckers.
people. But back to what my original point is about being for kids. The basis for this, the fear of clowns and the fear of the tree, these are things that legitimately, they come from Steven Spielberg's life. When he was a kid, this is what scared him. That's what he's making this movie on, is what scared him as a kid. But they overload it with cheese.
That tornado scene
The
is just
tornado is
horrible.
horrible. I do like the fact that if this was going to be a haunted house movie and they start to play it off as a joke where, you know, they put her on the floor and she slides across the floor, that's an okay way to start this, that it's a game, but it never takes that next step to where it's really scary. I mean, the next thing you see is the tree comes to life and takes the kid into the tree. That's so random. We jump from playing around and having fun with this little thing, this phenomena that's going in the house. So I completely disagree with you, Ken. Nothing builds up. It's instant gratification.
I don't think it's instant. I agree with you to an extent. I thought there could be a little bit more fun with how little things were happening and you could have slowly built it up. But how long do you want this movie to be? He does play with the idea of things scaring you as a kid. The closet. We already know that Carol Ann says, closet light, because she doesn't want no light. Then the closet gives her light. So they play off of that. They show that Robbie's scared of the tree at the beginning in the earlier scene. And then the next time that he meets the tree tries to eat him as a midnight snack. So
it's a very simplistic movie in that, okay, this kid's afraid of this. It's something's happened to that kid with that. Look at The Conjuring.
It's a movie 20 years later, though.
It could have been made in 1982. There's hardly any special effects. The way the story's told is you see this family go through an entire process of a haunting. We never get that. Family moves from having fun, trees eating kid.
Well, The Conjuring is Ed Warren. I mean, that's the Warrens. That's like Amityville spinoff.
I'm just saying the way the movie is made. It's a slow burn. The Conjuring could have been made in 1982.
Could have been, but it wasn't.
The bottom line in this movie is clear-cut Steven Spielberg. I'm just saying The Conjuring is not Steven Spielberg, obviously. This movie has all of your early 80s, mid-80s Steven Spielberg attributes to it.
Sure it does.
It's clearly Spielberg.
But there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that.
The ghosts coming out of the TV look exactly like the ghosts coming out of the Ark of the Covenant in Indiana Jones.
Sure, why wouldn't they?
The last Ark.
But that was the technology of the time. What movie before Poltergeist works the way The Conjuring works for you? And I'm a big Vincent Price fan, and none of those Vincent Price movies work like this.
The Haunting is a movie that was prior to this that works much better.
Now, I disagree with you. I don't think it does work much better. That movie doesn't scare me at one iota, The Haunting.
And Amityville scares the life out of me.
The Amityville scares me, but I think of it as being the stupid movie, but it does scare me.
But it has... The actual story is much scarier than the movie, and we found out that even the real story is pretty much bunk.
How dare you, sir?
The original tragedy of that house is much more interesting than the movie or what they made up.
I think there's some cool things about the horror here, though. I think the fact that this is built on a cemetery is cool. I love it when we see the ghost coming down the staircase. I think some of the things that they did were ingenious. The watches that were like a few years old compared to 100 years old. I liked how they presented a lot of things. I liked the Ghostbusters here.
To build on your one ghost coming down there, when they rewatched it on the video and you can see the multiple ghosts coming down. That was really awesome.
Some of the special effects really are cool in this movie, and that's the only thing that keeps this movie alive. The story does very little.
The acting is quite good, actually. I mean, Craig T. Nelson and Jo Beth Williams, I think, do a fairly good job in this.
And she's a creepy kid. See, this is something else that's never really hashed out. I think she has powers.
Oh, psychic abilities, clearly.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
This leads to the psychokinesis, and that's ultimately what a poltergeist is a PK manifestation, and that's not even discussed here.
Well, that's too highbrow.
It's talked about later on in the other films.
I've never bothered to see 2 or 3 or...
Don't bother to see 3 at least. 2 is reasonable, but it's forgettable too. Here's the thing though. There's connections here. Carol Ann is born in that house. There's a strong supernatural presence in that house. So there is a connection there. Here's the other thing that I'm going to tell you is the character of Tangina. She says that this place knows their biggest fears and plays off of it. And that's why we see the tree. And that's why we see the closet. And we see all these other haunts, because they know what scares them. Because they've been around them all this time. They've learned what scares them and what doesn't scare them. And then they go after them.
A slight change to the movie makes it scarier. Instead of having the tree come to life and actually eat the kid, and we're supposed to believe that that actually happens, why not have that happen in a nightmare that the kid then has to go see a therapist to find out what's exactly wrong with him? It doesn't have to come to life and really get him.
But a 10-year-old seeing it freaks him out.
Right.
8-year-old.
Having the little girl sucked into the void or whatever it is, into limbo, they never really do describe exactly where she's at. I really like the idea that she comes through on the static screen.
It's a movie called White Noise with Michael Keaton. I remember I would have a stereo system that wouldn't be playing anything. There would be voices coming out of the stereo system, because there was some type of frequency that it was picking up on, whether that be a radio, and it still does it to a certain extent on certain stereo system. Yeah, dead people. I see dead people. It doesn't have to be the scariest movie of all time to be really good. I think it has to do a mixture of scaring you and have empathy for the people that it's scaring. As Eric's saying, the actors do a really good job. Craig T. Nelson does a great job as the father, and Jo Beth Williams, great job as the mother.
The older daughter, you toss her away. She's very replaceable.
Yeah, well, she was actually in some other movies. She had a budding career actually going on at that particular time.
Up until. We'll get into that, folks.
Yeah,
stay tuned.
The parents are doing a great job. I buy Jo Beth Williams as the mother who's fascinated by the supernatural that's going on in the house, but then horrified about how it's dealing with her daughter. And she shows strength, but at the same time, she's scared. And so I think it's a very well-rounded.
I like how she acts. Her acting is good in a movie, but as far as the character goes, yeah, we see her having fun with it, but then here again, there's no time for the transition to breathe. She goes from having fun with it to that night the tree eats the kid. And it's like, well, that's a huge jump. And this is the other really weird thing. We see how this is affecting Craig T. Nelson, because he looks like he's been through the ringer.
So he's
got the dark eyes.
Yeah, he looks like. But Jo Beth Williams never looks like nothing's really.
She looks better, actually. She's dressing nicer.
Nothing really affects her.
She has a thing for the supernatural.
It's weird.
And the supernatural has a thing for her.
At least in my opinion, on that bed scene.
It's kind of disjointed in that way. I think you've got a clash of movie-making styles that doesn't mesh, and you don't get conflicting views of a movie, and I think that's what's happening here. It just tries to do too much too fast. I mean, it's 114 minutes, but it goes by super fast because it is chocked full from beginning to end. It's what's supposed to be a scare after scare after scare, and just a little bit of time to fill in the cracks to make a story. A little bit of time out to take Craig T. Nelson to the new cemetery that they're going to move and be like, this is going to be your house and blah, blah, blah. I don't know.
But we complain when a movie doesn't go with a fast pace, and we don't want to see.
I don't. I mean,
do we want this to be a 2.5-hour movie?
I don't know about that.
I think if we cut half of the scares out and replace it with actual character reactions, and we get to see how this is affecting the family, way that we barely see the teenage daughter. She's only in like 3 scenes, even a character. The son, after he gets eaten by the tree, they send him away. That's a heartbreaking scene. The decision to send him away, that's a huge decision that's just tossed away. It's literally just a scene. And that's a problem because that is a huge deal. We should have seen the conflict to ultimately send him away from the family to quote-unquote keep him safe.
But they were talking about this scene before. We talked to Grandma and she's looking forward. It's not like all of a sudden, boom, we are surprised by the fact that he's leaving. We've already been told ahead of time that
it's just a
and it's not like they sold him into slavery or something. They're just going to visit Grandma.
It's just a couple of lines. This should have been.
Not like he just got adopted or something.
Yeah, it's not like
they're to send their kid away so he doesn't.
Of course, any moron would do that. Why would you
want
your children?
What do you want to do? Spend a couple of days hanging out, and say we're going to think about this.
Hey, everybody, let's sleep downstairs while the ghosts come and get us.
I'm just saying, it would be a heartbreaking decision to have to make.
I don't know, man. If you get eaten by a tree, I don't think you want to hang out there anymore.
See,
I think
and
you'd rather hang out with Grandpa.
if you take that away or turn that into a nightmare, that's an entirely different situation.
Well, of course
and
it is.
And we see how that's affecting the kid.
But that takes away from the story of Carol Ann. Carol Ann is in the TV.
Then don't have the tree eat the kid.
I don't agree with the tree, so I'll agree with you on that. That's one thing that we probably, at least not eat him. I mean, I don't have a problem with the tree coming in and grabbing him, but when he starts eating him, I do have a little bit of problem, and then I have a problem with that fake tornado. But as far as them grieving...
Just think about that line that you just said. The tree eating a kid and the fake tornado.
Yeah, I have a problem with that. Yeah, I have a problem with that, but that's the only thing I have a problem with in this movie.
Just tossing
that out
there.
That's the only thing that I have a problem with this movie. But here's the thing. Why does she need to sit and remorse about her son that she had to send to grandma's when she has another kid missing? That's the most important thing right now.
The one she really loves.
The kid that's her baby, the kid that is being followed by what they call the beast. Somebody is chasing her daughter in this other dimension where you only can hear her through the TV set. You know what? I'm going to take time out from caring about me sending my son to see grandma. That's not going to happen, Ted. It's a totally different movie. Then you don't have the girl sucked up into this other dimension type of deal.
I didn't think this would be the passionate part of the movie we'd be debating about, to be honest with you.
Her character never seems distraught. You do see it the one time. That's really the only time you see her that she's actually going through something. She still looks beautiful. She's not distraught. Nothing about her comes off as distraught. And they make him look like run over crap.
He does look like he's got the flu and he's fighting. He's fighting COVID.
He looks like garbage. She doesn't. She keeps it together. I guess what I didn't articulate correctly enough. You never see them get to the point of desperation that would have taken enough to send your kid away and to separate yourself from your child. Because he's under attack too. She's missing and he's under attack. But they make the choice to send him away. And
but both the kids go away. The older daughter goes to stay with friends.
Never see the decision that would have been so distressing that would have made them make that choice.
I don't think it's distressing at all, Ted. I differ. I think it's a common sense move. I don't even think that scene has any real relevance or play in this movie. It's an afterthought scene, to be honest with you.
Plus, she cries her eyes out when he's leaving. She is distraught. She doesn't want to see him leave. They're giving you that scene
eyes out, but
no, she's like, call me.
Call me. Yeah, but it wasn't like
that's the extent. I mean,
but that's all you need, Ted. You don't need more than that. Or you should have to do it for all three kids.
Just throw herself on the cab.
No. It's not. I mean, isn't she worried about her daughter sleeping with her boyfriend at the Holiday Inn? When she's saying, I guess not. If that's really her kid, because me and Ted had that other story when they were interviewing the dad and say, how old is your wife? Oh, 31, 32. How old is your daughter? 16. And I'm like doing the math here. And I'm thinking,
I never caught that. Wow.
And then Ted read somewhere that this is his second wife, but they never play it off that way. I think they just say that to save face afterwards.
Second wife? Where do you get that from?
I guess it's in the novelization of the movie, because there is a novelization of this.
So you're saying she's the adopted daughter?
Well, she's a stepmom, but
we shouldn't care about her.
I mean, I never read exactly what happened to the first mom. I don't know if it was a situation where he's a widower and marries Jo Beth Williams' character.
He killed her. I knew it.
Well, that's a different movie.
Buried under the house.
His wife is pissed off, and she's getting revenge.
That's a whole different movie. Instead of putting meat on the bones of the character, they choose to inundate you with special effects and scares. What makes a horror movie for me, when you find something out about the character and you let a character develop, you just don't get that here. You don't get, the characters are
one-dimensional.
Yeah, they're secondary to all the
right.
Welcome to horror movies in general. In general, do not spend a lot of time giving you backstory about every single person and their relationships with everybody in the family. They don't really do that.
Well, you're wrong.
I'm wrong?
Yeah, you're really wrong. I mean, I know
Did we get that in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
Did I say the Texas Chainsaw Massacre scared me?
I think so. It doesn't scare you?
No.
If you would have saw that movie when you were 6 or 7, would have scared you?
Well, I mean, yeah, probably. But I saw it when I was a freshman in college.
Look at the movies of that time, the mid-70s to mid-80s. Horror movies of that time. We were
Sucked.
just talking about the Amityville horror film. That didn't try to
Not
build
good.
on any time. It's not good. None of that really is really that good. There are not that many movies out there that concentrate on that are good. One of my favorite horror movies of all time is Fright Night, and that doesn't have to have any character building. It's just a good scary movie with some comedy built in, just like this is. I love the comedy part of the remotes because we used to take our remotes and we'd go to a friend's house and we'll stand outside the window and start changing the
Right.
channels on them. So
I
I
like the
could,
one-liners in this movie. They are the comic relief in the one-liners is pretty good.
and I think that's where Spielberg comes into play, and I think that's what humanizes the whole film. And where I disagree with you, Ted, I do think that this is a well-rounded film. Could there have been some changes? Of course. I don't agree, like I said, with the tree. Could we have added maybe a little bit more family dynamic in there? Sure. There was a scene in there where Craig T. Nelson, when they're arguing about going to Pizza Hut, Craig T. Nelson
Right.
says, I hate Pizza Hut. And they cut that. In fact, if you see the cut from when they're talking about the chair going across and how that all works, they go straight to their next door neighbor. It's a bad cut. It's a
Right.
horrendous cut. But it's because the next line was supposed to be, let's go to Pizza Hut. I hate Pizza Hut, and they didn't want to offend Pizza Hut. Now you probably could, but not at that time. You couldn't.
Pizza the Hut.
We have a difference of opinion. I think the Haunted House movie has been done better.
So I'm not going to disagree with you on The Conjuring. I think Conjuring is a really good movie. I wouldn't say that's better than Poltergeist, but I could see why you like it more than, let's say, Poltergeist. But I don't think Poltergeist is this deadbeat horror film that doesn't stand the test of time. I think it does stand the test of time. People still quote it to this day. They're here is one of the most iconic lines of all time. And this movie is, people still think of this movie. They try to remake this movie and failed because it can't stand up to the original.
Well, that should have never been remade.
No.
That's a whole different issue about remakes. It's just that's lazy in of itself.
There are problems in this movie. I mean, we talk about the tree. The kid climbed the tree in the movie before all this happened. How scared was he really of this tree if all of a sudden a storm all of a sudden changes his mind? This should have been drawn out a little bit longer with the tree. If he walked by that tree during the day and said, no way, I don't want anything to do with it, I would have had then much better take on that tree thing. That tree thing should be gone. And then you have the medium, Tangia. I'm not sure what I think of her. She comes off being a little obnoxious for me a little bit. It's a give and take with her. I really like the other lady, Martha.
Dr. Lurch.
I like her because she actually seems almost like a motherly figure in this movie where she befriends Diane and there to support her. I like her character. She almost is kind of like the grandma that needs to be there to kind of keep the family together.
Her character has an arc. You see how things affect her.
Mm-hmm.
You see her get afraid.
Like when she's drinking that tea and the glass is just shaking.
And we haven't even brought up that particular scene, the guy that rips his face off. You see how things affect him. He's even
done.
has an arc.
He's out. Yeah.
Right. He even has
He ain't
an
returning.
arc. That's why I say that whole idea of him ripping his face off, that whole scene, that's probably the scariest part of the movie. You know why? Because it all happens in his head, and you can see that whatever is happening in this house is messing with his head completely. Now, the special effects here of him ripping his face off are mediocre at best, but they're limited by the age that they are. But if you would have brought in somebody like a Tom Savini and his protege, Greg Nicotero, you would have had better special effects. And that can be argued one way or another at that point, because a lot of people think that Tom Savini does a lot of basic makeup special effects like that. He actually gets scared. He gets scared enough that he's like, peace out. I'm out of here. I don't know what the hell's going on here, but you guys are out of your freaking mind staying here. He gets terrified. The other guy, he's like all in. He's like, I'm down for whatever you guys are doing. It's like, okay, if you were seeing all this stuff happen, you'd be freaked the hell out.
It's not happening to him. And one thing I'll say about the special effects, the fact that it's all in his head is why I give forgiveness for that special effect, because it's all in his head. It's how he's looking at it. It's not real. It's not supposed to be realistic because it's all in his head. And as far as the other guy, nothing happens to him personally. The stuff that is happening that he is seeing makes him more interested in it. I would be disappointed if both of them ran out. Then what kind of ghost hunter are you if every time you got scared you ran away? This is not like Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray. And
he got bitten when he was in the bedroom.
It's the same guy.
That's what I'm
That's the
saying. He
guy that
got
ripped
bitten
his
when he's
face
in the
off,
bedroom.
yeah.
He had his face ripped off. I mean, he's had a few things happen to him mentally and physically.
And maybe
Yeah.
this thing knows a little bit more about him and what
I'm
scares him,
sure
and
it
knows
does.
knows he's the weakest link out of the three because it
Yeah.
doesn't go after the other two. It just goes after him. I like them. I think they're an interesting group to bring into this family dynamic. And I could see this working out because of the relationships they have with the family. It just works well here, I think. And I love the fact you mentioned it earlier, Ted, the scene where Steven sees his boss and they're walking around and they happen to walk around by the graveyard, unless that's where the boss decides that's where he's
Phase
going to take
5's
him.
going to be.
I love the reveal of what happened down in his neighborhood. That would freak me out right there, even if nothing happened in my
Yeah.
house.
It did freak him out, though.
I love that scene as well. That scene should have had more gravity. That should have been the aha moment as to why everything's happening to his family. While it is an aha moment to us, the viewer, to him it's just like, okay, we're going to go back down to the crazy house where all the shit's flying around the house and the thing sucked my daughter into the closet.
It's
and
funny about that scene when he's talking about when they're walking
Yeah.
upstairs and he's go, I witnessed a matchbox car travels 7
7
feet.
feet.
And,
Yeah,
and,
right.
and Craig T. Nelson is looking
It's
at him
like-
was like, oh, you're going to fucking love this.
I actually have a problem with
Oh,
that scene
Buttercup.
though too.
I love that scene. He's like,
I have
it
a
took
problem-
7 hours. Yeah.
No, I like
Yeah,
that scene, but when they open the door and show all the things that are happening in the room,
Right.
that's too much
Yeah,
going
I
on. The record playing by
Yeah, I
the,
hate
was that Compass?
Let's be honest, George Lucas all over this as well because it's industrial light and magic.
Clearly.
It's industrial light and magic that does all of the special effects for the movie. Now, ILM is awesome, but you can tell that Spielberg and Lucas were just sitting there wanting to play. We haven't even gotten into the product placement of this in this movie.
Star Wars.
Holy crap.
Little Darth
Now,
Vader
this
there and stuff. Yeah.
This is before Star Wars was a billion-dollar organization. He still just had the licensing rights. It had not exploded into what Star Wars became. This is right around the time Empire Strikes Back had just come out. The product placement of all the Star Wars stuff here has to be just a complete and utter cash throw.
Yeah, because Return of the
to
Jedi is
George
83, a year later. So you know they're already doing the filming on it.
There was probably some type of relationship where, hey, you use my special effects and you
ILM.
put my stuff in the movie.
Right. That kid has everything that I would have wanted as a kid. It's like they went to Toys R Us and bought him everything out of the Star Wars section.
Part of the story that I don't believe was ever filmed, but supposed to happen after Robbie's birthday. So he had just had a birthday party. That's why we have the clown and why we have all these toys that are around. It's because he just had a big birthday party.
What grandparent buys that creepy ass clown for their kid?
You know what? That's a
I
good
wanna-
question. 'Cause
I had not seen Poltergeist. My grandparents bought me a clown that had the most demonic laugh ever. And literally, my sister and I would not ever press it because we were terrified by the sound it made.
Where's that clown now?
I have
It's
no
underneath
idea.
his
I
bed.
think we threw it
It's
away.
already, he's used it for a rainy day.
I think we threw it away.
He's going to show it to Michelle one night and be like,
Right.
hey, Michelle.
Right. And like I said, there's just too much here. There's no gravity to anything. It's just scare, a little bit of downtime to connect to say, oh, hey, guess what? We tore up a graveyard, and that's why all this is happening. And then back to scare. It's like, come on now.
I think there's enough pauses. Like there's the time where the doctor explains to Robbie about the light and stuff like that. I thought that was really well thought out and really well said. I thought it was one of the best speeches in the film. When you have Tangina explaining all the things that are going on in the house to prepare him, they're setting all these things up. I don't think it's scare, but I do think there are a couple scares we can take away. I said that's the only thing I had a problem with. I did come up with a third problem. Is the scene where the first time that the closet tries to bring Carol Ann into the closet, and it's got this vacuum. It's probably a Dyson. It's probably sucking her into the closet. The last thing to go is the bed. The bed doesn't weigh anything. It's not heavy. The mattress is probably 10, 15 pounds. It's bulky, but it's not heavy. That thing should have been sucked right up before even Carol Ann is, or with Carol Ann. That's kind of more of nitpicking than it is a real problem. So.
The whole idea is kind of out there.
I like the idea of a portal. There's an entrance and an exit. There's an entrance to get in and there's an exit to get out. I kind of thought that was ingenious.
It should have been the tree. The tree should have been the entrance.
Right.
The tree should have been an entrance.
The tree should have ate Carol Ann.
Or even the quote-unquote swimming pool.
When they did the swimming pool, they didn't find any...
Yeah, I thought that too. They dug,
Yeah.
no bodies came up, right?
Here's my theory on this. These construction workers, these guys who are working on the pool, they know that the bodies are all still there. They had to know bodies were still there when they build all these houses. And I think these guys are still part of that crew. They don't say anything because they're getting paid not to say anything.
And none of the houses, typical California homes, have any basements. You see just all the slabs built when they're up at the cemetery. They're not really digging.
Right. You just don't do all that without your construction workers coming across. Nothing. And that's why in the beginning when he's like tasting the sauce and stealing food and drinking the coffee, they know each other. They have a relationship.
I can't stand that. But the whole scene with her in the swimming pool, and even Craig T. Nelson, his time in that swimming pool area, that's legitimately scary. You've fallen into this thing and it's mud and you can't get out of it. I think one of the most iconic scenes from the movie is when she's in that swimming pool area and the skeletons start to pop up next to her. That's a legitimately classic horror film moment. That's a classic horror film moment, and that's one of those things that keeps this movie. In my opinion, those skeletons that are made up, it almost reminds you if you've seen Fulci's Zombie. It has sort of feel to it. Those skeletons are actually scary. The ones that pop out of the coffins and stuff, here again, that's too much. But those skeletons that are in the mud there, that's legitimately scary.
I don't know. I kind of like the coffins that come up. And here's the other thing.
It's funny, and I don't want funny right after being scared.
I don't know if it's funny. I kind of like it. But here's the other thing is, again, the house knows what scares you. She complains about the swimming pool. She's scared of this swimming pool, mainly because she thinks Carol Ann might fall into it. But she actually has this fear of the swimming pool doing something bad. That's why she falls in.
Right.
And that's why she falls in, because the house pushes her towards what she's scared of, and that's the swimming pool.
A lot more thought than what the writers did.
That's why I get paid for, I get paid for that. No, wait, so we don't get paid again.
Right.
Darn it. How about we get paid for this?
I think that you've more thought than what they did. That scene is legitimately scary. You can actually see that there is a threat there. She's legitimately in danger at that point.
And how about those neighbors?
There's so much stuff here that I just can't stand. I don't like them. I think they're essentially that's useless.
They don't get bit by mosquitoes. What the hell?
That's so dumb.
You know, ever sucked on you, son? I don't know, Dad.
It's ridiculous. But see here again, these two people are having stuff happen in their house that's freaking them out to a point where they're actually going to go to their neighbors and ask if they have any unusual activity in their house.
The neighbors they don't like.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Played off as funny and not as we're desperate to find out a way to get away from this thing.
All right, gentlemen. Well, I think it's something that needs to be brought up. It's one of the rumors that have plagued this movie since it was released and after the effects of it. But the rumors or the stories of this being a cursed film by some of the cast members who have passed, who are no longer with us. People have played it off as being issues related to the film itself. What do you guys think of that?
It's not cursed like The Omen or like The Exorcist. If you believe that any of those movies were cursed, this doesn't fall into that category. First of all, there's only 2 deaths that have happened here. One a murder. One happened years later. You could argue post-production or during the filming, there's a lot of people that have different takes on Heather O'Rourke passing on while they were still filming it. There's some scenes in Poltergeist 3 that make it seem like they're not trying to show her face because she might have already passed on at that particular time.
She did. I don't know if it was Warner Brothers or MGM, I think, is who was making the movie. They forced them to finish the movie. They gave them a tersely worded letter from their attorneys that they were going to finish the movie or else. So they forced the last few scenes of the movie to be filmed where they had a body double stand in for Heather O'Rourke.
Heather would have wanted it that way.
The actual director of the movie had developed a relationship with Heather. They said that it was a betrayal for them to ask Cole to finish the movie, especially when they had somebody stand in, because they did have to cover her face. So they held her close to their chest with her head facing away from the camera. It's horrible.
Is it any different though than Brandon Lee in The Crow with
Yes.
having to
Yes, because
digitalize him the rest of the movie? Is it any
yeah,
different?
well, they also used another double for some of the stuff as well. You can tell. But in my opinion, it's completely different. There was still enough that they had in takes where they could make the movie fine. It still works. Poltergeist is not cursed, like you said, Ken, like The Omen was, or even the Twilight Zone movie. What happened to Heather was a tragedy. Heather was diagnosed incorrectly with Crohn's disease. And what she really had was essentially, it was like a growth on the intestines that exploded, kind of like what happens when your appendix bursts. And that's what ultimately ended up killing her. It was nothing supernatural or weird. It was
Nothing on the scene of the movie.
right. It was just
Right, nothing.
it was a horrible tragedy.
Did go into successful surgery, but after surgery, she had cardiac arrest.
Right. It was too much
Um,
for her body.
yeah,
And
probably too much on her heart.
and of course the other one is Dominique Dunn, who played the eldest daughter. She had a boyfriend who was a chef for Wolfgang Puck. And that is significant because of what happens after the murder. She broke up with him and he strangled her and murdered her. And then he only got like a 7-year sentence. And partially, a lot of people believe is because of his connections to Hollywood and connected with Wolfgang Puck. He only served 3.5 years, and now he's changed his name and is still a chef somewhere. It's ironic that this guy gets away with this, but then there are other killers of Hollywood. Those guys are still in jail, but this guy, he's out roaming the country.
She actually broke up with him, and
Right.
he actually tracked her down at home, called, and found out that she was there and showed up. Nobody actually, I don't think, saw the murder, and I think that can maybe play a little bit of part of it. But he was found guilty. That's
He was found guilty of, I think, degree murder is what he was
or
found guilty
manslaughter or
of.
something like that. She had an upcoming career. She was actually doing some TV stuff. In fact, I think her last role was Hill Street Blues, and they actually dedicated the episode to her in her memory.
The whole thing about this film being cursed is the fact that in interviews after the movie had come out, it was found out that actual human skeletons in the movie, and then of course the tabloids and then the internet all took onto this and used this. People have not done the research and found out actual human skeletons used in movies has been done. The special effects people who do this sort of thing, it's like 5 times more expensive to make a plaster cast of a skeleton than it is to use a real skeleton. So what they do is they go to places where scientific research is done, and what they do is they bleach the skeletons and then they're used in movies.
I also heard they get a lot of these skeletons from India.
Possibly.
One thing I will add about this curse was there was a scene where the character of Robbie, played by Oliver Robbins, he says that this happened on set. The scene where the clown wraps itself around his neck, it actually got stuck and was choking him, and Steven Spielberg had to actually unstuck it, or else something bad could have possibly happened to Robbie.
Why wouldn't the director help?
He was he was legitimately being choked. And that's just a failure of the prop. This is completely different than The Exorcist. That soundstage and that film, where that film was filmed, that place, there was legitimate paranormal activities that were happening on the set of that film.
And
Where
most
it
of that
was
stuff happened around that film, during the film, or during its release. It's not
right.
deaths that happened years later.
Right. Just as an example, the actual set caught fire for The Exorcist when nobody was there. There was nothing left on. It just caught fire. And there was also pockets of extreme cold, where there was no outside of the area that was refrigerated where they shot the bedroom scene when it's extremely cold. Those are legitimate things that happened on that set. No weird circumstances like what happened with The Omen either.
Steven Spielberg was actually trying to get Stephen King to help write this. This originally was to be more like Close Encounters. It was supposed to be about aliens. And then it morphed into a horror movie. And he tried to reach out to Stephen King to kind of help write it. But Stephen King was, I believe, on his way to like Europe, possibly England, and just couldn't make it work. But that would have been interesting to see how that film would have worked. 1982, Stephen King and Steven Spielberg working together. Maybe that would be the movie Ted would want to see.
With George Lucas special effects?
In the last 5 or 6 years, we've entered into a Stephen King renaissance. Now it's come back in a big way to his works. Depending on how they make that movie, it could have been really good, or it could have been Salem's Lot.
But I think in this case, you also have to look at the directors that handled Stephen King's movies in the 80s.
Brian De Palma did an amazing job with Carrie. I even though it is cheese, I think John Carpenter did a good job with Christine. I think that's kind of a fun movie.
How about Pet Sematary?
There are parts of Pet Sematary I like.
It's okay. A much scarier book than it is a movie. But see here again, and don't even bring up The Shining because it's two completely different things.
But you look at movies like, you had the Stand miniseries. Then you also had the worst movie I ever saw in the theater, Graveyard Shift. I think it's one of the most horrible movies I've ever seen.
And Needful Things was one of my favorite Stephen King books. And it's just a god-awful movie. And it has Max von
Sydow, yeah.
And Ed Harris in it. It's just an abomination. It's horrible. It's just a disgustingly horrible movie. And the Stand miniseries, I loved it at the time. It's really bad now. And I was really excited for the remake that came out on Paramount Plus. And they still didn't do The Stand any justice. It's like I've kind of given up on the hope the Dark Tower series a decent movie actually ever gets made out of the Dark Tower series. Because the movie with Matthew McConaughey and Idris Elba, it was just bad. I enjoyed it for what it is, but as an homage to the masterpiece that is the Dark Tower series, which is the culmination of Stephen King's career, essentially. It'll be the thing that he's remembered for the most.
All right, man, we're getting off on a tangent here with Stephen King. I'd love to talk Stephen King.
Before we wrap this all up, I wanted to point out a scene in this movie that's total Steven Spielberg that actually is a little fun. In the beginning of the movie, before they're watching the football game, you got the guy riding on a bike with the beer.
Yeah.
And the kids have the little RC cars that make him crash. What kind of man has to go to the store, buy all that type of beer on a bike?
Actually, he got that from his house.
Did he get it from his house?
Yes, he was leaving his house. But still, what kind of man leaves his house on his kid's bike?
Completely stupid. I absolutely hate
But it's total Steven Spielberg.
Oh, it is. It is. You can see where he's got his fingers all over this. And it's like the same thing happens with the Goonies. You can see where he's got his little Steven Spielberg. It's really amazing to me. And it might be the brilliance of somebody like Lawrence Kasdan. It's amazing Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark turned out amazing as it did.
The whole series is a moneymaker except for the Crystal Skull. But the first three were
an abomination.
The first three were just colossal hits.
The first one was amazing. A colossal hit too.
Well, of course, because there had been such a big gap, everybody wanted another one. I mean, I saw it opening night, and I saw it then 2 more times to make sure that what I saw the first time, that it was horrible. It was as horrible the third time as it was the first time. Almost unforgivable.
Did the same thing, Ted. Did the same thing, but I will disagree a little bit with Eric. I don't think Temple of Doom it's not a bad movie. It's not Crystal Skulls, but it's definitely nowhere in the facility of Raiders or The Last Crusade. It's
no, of course not. No,
it's definitely the lesser of the three. We just don't.
It's the fun movie, if you will.
It is. I thoroughly enjoy the movie. It's a problem that you have when you're ranking Star Wars movies. A bad Star Wars movie is still better than a lot of other movies, whereas a bad Indiana Jones movie is still better than a lot of other movies.
I don't know about Crystal Skull, though.
The Crystal Skull is what happens when an unhinged and untethered George Lucas gets a hold of an untethered Steven Spielberg, and they make just the most batshit crazy movie ever.
I'll go back to the scene that I was talking about. I like the scene, Ted, and here's the reason why I like it. It gives it a funny type of ha-ha moment before it gets too
The
serious.
guy on the bike with the beer?
Yeah.
Yes, and they got the music. It's a very
It is.
haha moment.
You have the funny part. You don't need that. You have the funny part of Craig T. Nelson arguing with neighbor about Mr. Rogers and the remote controls are crossed.
I think it's still fun.
You know what the funny thing is about that scene?
Those kids should have been disciplined.
Get off your ass and turn the TV manually without the remote and problem solved.
No crap.
I know. It's like, guys, turn the knob.
Yeah. Why don't you turn it manually yourself and I'll turn mine manually and we won't touch
And we'll
the
call it a
remote.
day. Right.
Yeah,
But no.
exactly.
Let's wrap this bad boy up here. Ken, let's start with you.
I thoroughly enjoyed this movie. In fact, I enjoyed watching it again this time around for the podcast. I won't lie, this movie a little bit still scares me. I was watching it the other night, and at a certain point, when it got more scarier, I decided to watch the second half later on the next day. I just think that this movie is scary, especially if it scared you as a child, because those scares, you remember them. A good scary movie will scare you 40 years later after you watched it. And I think this movie is one of those movies. I think the cast does a great job, especially the parents. I think the special effects, there are some misses, but there are a lot of hits here, especially for 1982. I really love the stair sequence with the ghost coming down. I think that's one of the best highlights of the film. I love what happens with the skeletons in the swimming pool. I think those are great too, and I disagree with Ted. I like the coffins popping up, and I like seeing what people were dressed in, and I think that's kind of cool. Where it fails to me is I thought I could have done a little bit better job at the end. I just feel like they missed an opportunity here. I think they went way too much special effects. If there was an area where I just think that was just thrown everything in the kitchen sink, it was at the end. You have Spider-Woman. She's going up around up and on the ceiling, and for me maybe a little too much. The scene where you had the big thing at the end there now becomes this monster that's trying to suck them in, and how does the wife just hang on to be able to grab her son and then their daughter and wheel them back in? It's a little hokey at that particular point, but I still think this movie does well. I think it's iconic. I disagree, Ted. I think the characters are well-rounded. We get a sense of how the parents feel and how they feel about their family. They are a close-knit family. I don't need anything more. I know this family and I believe this family to be a real family. So that's pretty cool. So I'm going to give this movie a B+. I don't think it's as good as The Omen, which I also give a B+. So if I were to say which one's better, it's definitely The Omen over Poltergeist. Overall, I think it's a solid B+, and I will watch it over and over again until I die and they use my bones in a horror film, which I'm willing to sign off now for that, but not where you get to kill me off now. But when I die one day, you can use my bones in a movie. Just make sure you put me in the credits.
Okay, well, I wish I had Ken's enthusiasm about this movie. I'm a little taken off by it, unfortunately. If this is 1984 or 85 when I'm watching it and I'm scared out of my wits, this movie would give me nightmares, and it did give me nightmares, and I remember those nightmares. As I've watched it recently, I'm like, as horror movies go, or thrillers, or whatever you want to call this movie, for my age right now, this thing's a little hokey. The special effects are hokey. You've got Spielberg and you got Lucas here just pulling the strings on this thing, throwing everything in there just for the sake of throwing it in because it's the era and that's what they do, and they want this thing to be their movie. And they made it their movie, and we know it made a lot of money. I think it was the 8th top grossing movie of the year, I believe. It did well. It was a blockbuster. It is an iconic movie, but I don't know if it really holds up as well as other genre movies would hold up. I think the acting is really good. I think Jo Beth Williams and Craig T. Nelson are really good in this. The other actors hold up well. It's a very believable family. I like the plot of the movie. The plot of the movie is very, very intriguing to me. Even the way Ken read the plot, it's still very intriguing. There's a lot of different avenues I think that could have been taken that would have made this movie a far better movie, and a far better movie that would have survived the test of time. I think a lot of the directions they made are hokey and jokey and just not there for me. I wish I had Ken's enthusiasm on this when it comes to the rating, but I just can't. And especially since I've watched it more and more recently, damn, my rating goes down more every time I watch it. I'll be honest with you. I'm giving this movie, and this hurts. Oh, it hurts so much. I'm giving this movie a solid C. Borderline C plus, but it's not there. It's a C. And honestly, if I don't ever watch it again, it's not the end of the world, which really, really hurts me because I really fought for this movie for us to review it. And as I watched it more and more, my love of it just died. It really did. Sad.
It's interesting because this was your nomination.
I know. That's what really, really kind of pisses me off because I hadn't seen the movie in like 5 or 6 years. Like I was telling you, Ken, I've owned this DVD for pushing 20 years. This was one of the first DVDs I bought. And at that time, I really, really loved this movie. I hadn't seen it in a couple years, and I think I remembered it a little bit differently. I mean, 5, 6 years, really, in the scheme of things, as someone our age, doesn't change a lot. But apparently, for me, in watching this movie, I'm looking at it, I guess, maybe through a reviewer's eyes, but it just wasn't doing it for me like it did in the past. It really upset me because I watched the thing 3 times, and by the third watch, I was like, oh, do I got to do the dishes? Or, I'm thinking other places. My mind's not focused on it. I just couldn't get into it anymore. I really pushed for this one. And I don't regret it because they can't all be gems, and every movie is different to everyone who watches it. And we've really discussed a lot of points on this movie and a lot of different avenues and a lot of different things that we see differently through 3 different eyes. But for me, it's a C. Ted, wrap us up, man. Where are you going?
Well, ironically, Eric, I think we're pretty much in lockstep with this. The review of this movie reminds me a lot of The Goonies because it's another movie that we all saw when we were younger, and Ken still likes it, but you and I fallen off. It just has that eerie similarity, and I think one of the running things that connects the two is Steven Spielberg. And that's where I'll start my review. This is a disappointing movie for me as well. There is outline of a good movie here, of a good scary movie. And I do believe and I like the family, even though the oldest daughter, who's rarely even in the movie, and it's never really explained why. The problem is there's just too much, and nothing is given any time to breathe here. Professors who are the paranormal investigators, quote unquote, a lot of that stuff is really cool, but the big stuff is so hokey. There are really good parts of this movie that I really, really like. Like, I love the scenes of them going into the swimming, of what is supposed to be the swimming pool. It's basically a huge mud pit. That's a scary feeling when you're in something like that and you're trapped and you can't get out. That's a legitimate scare. A lot of the legitimate scares of this movie just aren't followed up on. It's just move on to the next one. We never get the stakes that make this scary. And I've said it before, and I'll continue to say it again. Horror is subjective. What's scary to me is not going to be scary to somebody, and I completely understand that. This just doesn't do it for me. Because if you look at the other movies around the time that made this movie, made for kids. That's the feeling that I get. I don't get that this was made for me as an adult to be scared. That being said, this movie for me is a solid C. I probably will watch it again. Somebody will probably want to watch it, so I'll watch it because it doesn't do anything for me. And like you said, Eric, by the time I got to the third watch, it became tedious.
When it comes to Spielberg, what horror movies has Spielberg done? I'm drawing a blank.
Well, a lot of people put Jaws in the horror frame.
Now, see, Jaws and Close Encounters are my number 2 and 1 movies of all time. Love Spielberg.
There's a lot of Spielberg that I really, really like.
But what kind of horror movie?
He's not really. Yeah,
that's what I was gonna say. This isn't really his genre. Let's be honest.
Which is why somebody like a Tobe Hooper, he still had a lot of cred for Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And you're bringing in the guy who's the best special effects movie maker at the time, Steven Spielberg, with somebody who made Texas Chainsaw Massacre, one of the grittiest, down and dirty, pendant horror movies of all time at that time. This should have been much, much more than what it was. And it's just unfortunate that I don't know if it was too many fingers in the pot.
I think a PG rating hurt it. PG rating, you're really kind of limiting yourself where you are.
But at the same time, it's not really an R.
It's not an R. Oh, clearly not an R.
There's no PG-13 rating at that.
Not an 82.
Well, here again, this is another movement. This falls right into the time frame of when Steven Spielberg was leading the crusade PG-13. and he's ultimately the one that got it done. And Temple of Doom, I believe, was the first PG-13 movie.
Yes, it was.
And this was the hill he was going to die on to create PG-13. It's almost like he made a bunch of movies in a row trying to prove the point that there needs to be a PG-13. And this kind of falls right into that genre. But see, there's also these movies, as we talked about, The Goonies. Steven Spielberg had so much credibility, he started to develop his own directors.
Zemeckis?
Zemeckis was a Spielberg guy. Donner was a Spielberg guy with Goonies. Toby Hooper, who got pulled into this. So he started to have these little movies where he would pull in other directors and have them make the movie, but they were all him. It's one of those weird things.
Little proteges.
But if you think
Yeah.
about executive producer, sometimes has more authority on how a movie looks like than the actual
Not
director.
as much as what Steven Spielberg held
Probably
over.
not, but he is the golden boy.
He was at the time, and to a certain extent he is now with DreamWorks, SKG, and Amblin Entertainment. Those are two of the biggest movie houses in Hollywood, right?
My last thought, by the way, on this movie, just to let you know, that I didn't say this earlier, but I think the dig in the swimming pool is what disturbed the Greys and started all this happening.
Well, yeah, they
Just-
dug up Tweety.
It was all Tweety that started
It's
this
all
whole
Tweety
ruckus.
that started this.
But
That's
it
right.
all started roughly around when they were putting a swimming pool. Nothing
How
happened.
dare they disturb the ground and put a swimming
Nothing
pool in?
happened until the swimming pool because, like you said, Eric, earlier, these are all slabs. These are not basements, so there could be a disturbance of graves that actually caused all this to happen. But that's
So
my
you
final
were
thought.
saying there was a disturbance in the force.
Disturbance in the force.
Clearly. And on that note, we're going to wrap this up. Ken, where can they find us on the World Wide Web?
Well, on Facebook, they can find us on the Movie Marquee. Just go ahead and type in the Movie Marquee with 2 E's and you'll find our Facebook page. We are having great conversations. This movie was picked by you all. There was actually a tie, and I broke the tie, and I chose Poltergeist over Night of the Living Dead, which was also an Eric movie nominated. We all nominated 2 movies, and we probably would be giving Night of the Living Dead a C2 because Eric doesn't know what he's talking about. Anyway,
I would not be giving that movie a C. That is
No,
a
that's definitely not a
groundbreaking
C.
movie.
Change
Not
it.
saying I regret not picking it. I'm just saying, I don't know, man. I don't know.
hey Ted, what's the next movie?
Yeah, God help us, Ted. What are we reviewing next?
The next movie is going to be a real horror show for the two of you.
It's going to be a real horror movie.
Clerks 2.
So bad we can't believe it got made.
What's happening?
How did they get the financing?
2 words. Kevin Smith. It's the revenge of Kevin Smith. Kevin Smith is going to haunt Ken until the end of time.
I'm going to quote Robbie here from Poltergeist. Daddy, drive away.
Drive away, Daddy.
Where can they find us, Ted, on Twitter?
On Twitter, we can be found at movie_marquee with 2 E's. If you're on Twitter, send us a shout out. We'll have a lot of fun on Twitter.
Awesome. Ken, anyone on Facebook? Any new comments?
Chad came up and talked about that he checked out one of our episodes from last year on Full Metal Jacket. If you want to find out what Chad had to say, you have to actually go to the Facebook page to see it. I'm not going to give you anything. So
That's right.
you go to that Facebook page, you read what's on there, okay? We have a lot of fun. We're posting more articles about things that are happening in the movie world. One of the History of the World Part 2 is being made into a series by Hulu. And Mel Brooks is the executive producer, and he's helped writing it. So that's kind of a fun thing that we posted on our site.
With that, we'll wrap this up. Thanks, everyone, for joining us, and we'll see you next time at the movies.
See you at the movies.
See you next time at the Movie Marquee.